Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Education and Skills Service Transformation Committee on the 24th of July 2024. And it's raining, which is not a good thing, but there we go. So we have our agenda in front of us and papers. So can I ask first whether we've got any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, lovely. I haven't had any either. And we move on to the second item on the agenda, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Do we have any? We don't have any there. Thank you very much. And then we move on to the minutes. We've got 3 pages of minutes. So can I ask us to have a quick scan of the 3 pages? Can we check them? Page 1, page 2 and page 3. And if committee members are content, I can approve and sign the minutes as a correct record. Are we happy, committee members? Thank you, Lyndon. Sandra, lovely. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so we move on to item number 4, which is supporting positive behaviour in schools. And I think we've got a presentation from Kate Phillips. Kate?
Yes, thank you. Hi, thanks very much. So I'm just sharing my screen now. If I could just check that that's okay for everybody.
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, lovely, thanks. So this is really a follow-up on the discussions we had in the previous Service Transformation Committee. So the main purpose is to give you an update on the next steps that we'd agreed in the recent meeting. So I've just highlighted in green here the elements that we are working towards achieving at the moment, and then there's still some further actions. Obviously, this work is going to take a period of time to achieve. So we discussed in the previous meeting that our priorities would be around some partnership work and hosting some workshops to facilitate that working. We were also agreed that we were going to issue a questionnaire for schools to gauge some feedback really in terms of what needs to happen around the issue of supporting positive behaviour in our schools, and what elements perhaps we need to do in order to support that work. Those items, as I say, are green at the moment because we've made some steps and some progress towards them, and I'll share the detail of that this afternoon. But we also know that we still need to review our policy, work on identifying good practice, create a working group, and then report back to this Service Transformation Committee. So those are actions that we will continue to develop throughout the course of the year. But for the moment, I can give you an update on the workshop that we held on the 9th of July. So it was a workshop held in the Towers Hotel, and we had around 60 representatives attend from a range of different agencies. So to give you an idea of the kind of scope of representation, we obviously had representation from our school colleagues from both primary, secondary, from our special schools at senior leadership level, but we also had middle leaders as well, which is really important to us. There were representatives there from our pupil referral unit and from the broader education directorate. We were also had representatives from health, from our local health board. We were thrilled that we had some councillors from this committee attend as well. Really appreciate the input from the Service Transformation Committee to the work. We had a broad representation from Child and Family Services from a number of their teams, from the CMET team, which is the Contextualised Missing, Exploited and Trafficked team, from the Youth Justice Service. We had some officers from our legal department. We had our trade union colleagues there, which was important. We had a broad sweep of the trade union representatives. We had colleagues from Welsh Government and also from the Swansea Parent Carer Forum. So a real breadth of experience. We did have some agencies as well that we wanted to include that were invited, but for reasons of kind of calendar and so on, weren't able to attend. So we are going to host a further workshop, and we hope that that will include some of our colleagues from the police who wanted to attend, but the diary commitments made it difficult, and also some of our third sector colleagues as well. So that will be a priority for invitations for the workshop that we're planning next, which I'll talk about shortly. The purpose of this workshop was really to share the context and the current issues, and then It was really very much a workshop, so it was very much about gaining information and deciding what kind of steps we could take collaboratively to go forward. So the aims of the workshop really was to have a very open and honest conversation, and these were our kind of aims that were shared with participants. We wanted everyone to be really kind of respectful of differing viewpoints and challenges, because we recognise that for every agency, some of the difficulties that we're experiencing can manifest themselves in very different ways, and we would see different solutions. So it's about coming together and pooling our shared resource and experience and how we work collectively and collaboratively. So it was really important that we kind of allowed everyone to explore their different viewpoints. There was an ask that participants were creative and solution focused, that we were looking at what could be achieved, what could be seen as positive solutions for some of the challenges that are being faced. And we wanted those solutions to be aspirational, but also achievable. So recognising some of the challenges that exist in services, and so making sure that we were really pulling together something that could be achieved. So there were 5 discussion points, and the focus of the workshop, it was a full morning, was really about allowing participants to explore these different discussion points. So we asked them about the issues that different agencies were dealing with in regards to the behaviours of children and young people. We asked what approach they thought was needed to support children and young people to manage their behaviours. We asked what they wanted to see happen in their own organisations, and we wanted to find out what they could offer individually as practitioners and as organisations to support behaviour for schools in Swansea, and then how we could work collectively. We took those 5 questions for one session at a time, and we collected the feedback. And I think it's important to emphasise this was the first step in this work. So we are going to have further workshops. So I will share the feedback with you, but and I think it's important to do so. But I think also just to recognise that we didn't have all our agencies represented. There were more schools that we would like to engage with, and that work is very much ongoing. So we expect to build on this feedback. But I thought it would be helpful for you to see some of the shared emerging themes that came out of that discussion. So when we talk about the shared themes, as I say, they're to date, so there's still much work kind of to be done and more views to be collated. But one of the first parts of the conversation was around what the issues were. So our agencies, our colleagues were sharing that for schools particularly, parental and community engagement was very challenging. They felt that was creating some difficulties, and the influence of social media was a common theme in terms of a challenge and a kind of recognition as well that sometimes often actually children and young people understand and are able to use social media in a way that perhaps adults that don't have that same level of knowledge, so that becomes very challenging. There was a recognition that behavioural and mental health issues are increasing, and that is challenging. And there was a recognition of the post-COVID impact and also expectations. So that kind of society has changed since the pandemic, and the expectations from children and young people, from families, are different of schools, and perhaps schools' expectations on families are different too. So that was recognised as something that's an issue. Resource and funding constraints were identified. I think, we recognise the cost of living crisis, as well as, pressures on public service budgets and on school budgets. And then that's perceived as, and on other support services resources. And so that's created some challenges in terms of accessing support. And then there were issues identified around transition and placement issues. So when children transition from primary to secondary school, for example, but also securing specialist placements or specialist interventions for children and young people who may need them. We know we have a pressure on specialist places, and that was seen as something that was challenging. So we asked around the approaches that participants thought was needed in order to support positive behaviour. There were some shared themes around the need for training and development. There was a level of dialogue around the training that's available for newly qualified teachers, also for student teachers, but also for support staff as well, so across the whole spectrum. And interestingly, there was also emerging themes around support training and development for staff who are longer in their career, so perhaps have been working for a more significant period of time, but as the issues are new and different, perhaps more training is needed to support those who are perhaps longer in their careers. Trauma-informed approaches were a shared theme across all participants, and they recognised the benefits of trauma-informed approaches. And also linked to the issue around parental and community engagement, it was identified that approaches that would help support that, break down some of those barriers and allow for more collaborative working with parents and with the community would be beneficial. Early intervention and support was identified as an approach that would be beneficial. And you may remember from the presentation that I shared in the previous meeting, there's a lot of research that will evidence that a relatively smaller investment at early stages can be really effective and also prevent escalation and a need for increasing and more significant intervention at later stages. So I think early intervention was a really important theme that came through in terms of the approaches that are needed. Equally, there was a lot of shared comments around consistent and collaborative approaches. And so I think what's emerging from that is the need for a shared, articulated approach across Swansea schools, and a need for a kind of shared strategy and policy that very clearly outlines for everybody what the expectations and approaches are that would support understanding for children, for young people, parents, and also support schools in delivering that message. There was a lot of talk about positive behaviour policy. So this work is about promoting positive behaviour and also around addressing the root causes. So not looking at kind of punitive approaches, but actually what are the issues that are underpinning some of the challenges, and how do we support children and young people. So in terms of, further approaches, that we talked about some funding and resources was necessary. So obviously, there are pressures on resource, and in order for this to happen, we need to know how we need to understand how we can best invest our resource in the right area, and that would be around the early intervention and support to develop consistent policies and practices. Collaboration and joined up services. It was really beneficial to have our colleagues from Child and Family Services so well represented in the workshop. And I think, the recognition that we're all collectively working with the same individuals, the same children, the same families. So, really about emphasising how we can work collaboratively rather than separately to make sure that we get a consistent approach. And then there was the further theme around approaches that would support parental and community engagement. We asked all participants what they could offer. So after they'd kind of identified some of the issues and looked at some of the approaches that were needed, we thought it would be really helpful to understand what they could offer as either individuals or agencies, as schools, as social workers, and so on. So they were all kind of very much bought into the processes of early intervention and support, that they could offer training and development in their own areas of specialism and expertise, and that would help us to map out a training offer. There was work that could be done from individuals around that parental and community engagement, but I guess what we would need to do as part of our work is to map out what that would look like. So we have people who can do it, but what is the ask of them, and how do we get that consistent approach? And that would then would inform part of our consistency and shared values. So I think, one of the next steps will be around how we really articulate what we want our approach to be, so that we've got this engagement and commitment from everyone to work collaboratively. But what is the key message? So we make sure that we're very clear about that shared value and those shared expectations. And then I think this was an interesting contribution as well around flexibility and collaboration. So kind of reflecting on the issues that emerged, being perhaps something that are newer, things that we haven't previously been familiar with or expected, the flexibility in approach, the willingness to change and do things differently, I think was a really important observation from participants, that they could contribute in terms of working differently to suit the new way in which society is developing. And our final question for the group was around how we could work collaboratively. So again, you'll really start to see that the themes were very common across all of those areas. So it was around the multi-agency working and collaboration, supporting a common language and consistent policies. So even in the workshop, different agencies, different practitioners would be talking in perhaps different language, using different terminology. So finding a way to have a shared language about the issues we're experiencing, the approaches we are delivering, and the support we could offer is, I think, an important piece of work that will come out of this. The importance of training and professional development was an ask from a collective offer, and I think that that's certainly excuse me, something that's achievable. How we develop our community and parental engagement, you've seen that as a theme in every question that was asked, and so that's going to be something that's going to be really important to look at and articulate and identify our approaches. And then there was an ask that there's a focus on well-being and support for schools, and I think that's really important. There is a whole school approach to emotional health and well-being, and I think, you know, really critical recognition that it's about a whole school, a whole community's health and well-being, so that you know, we have expectations of our children and young people, and we offer support to our children and young people, but we need to do the same for our professionals as well. For teachers need to have their own emotional and mental health supported, and teaching assistants, school staff is a very challenging environment to work in, and so we need to make sure that we build communities that are compassionate and allow everybody to achieve their best. And that's I think, you know, an important message that will come out of this work as well, that it's about a kind of, you know, an approach to supporting everybody to enable everyone to do their best. So, you know, that feedback, as I say, has come from that group of 60 professionals. There'll be a further workshop, and in terms of our next steps, we've got a questionnaire that asks the same question that's gone out to all schools, because we held the workshop quite close to the end of term, given the kind of priority and urgency really to address this work. We wanted to get it done before the end of the academic year, but recognising also that wasn't the best time for all schools. So we've sent the questions out via a questionnaire, and we will repeat the workshop in September. So it will be a rerun really of the same workshop, but for those who weren't able to attend, so that we can get a fuller, further spread really of representation from schools and from other colleagues. We've identified the shared themes so far. And we need to draw out the feedback from the questionnaires and from the second workshop to see if they marry up. There may be something additional. They may strengthen the initial findings, or we may need to include some additional comments in there. I think the next thing that we'll need to do as well is kind of bust any myths and agree some parameters. So what I've shared with you in terms of feedback is really the shared expectations, views and comments. As there will always be, there will be some more extreme views around the edges of those, and we need to agree, like, this is what we do, and this is what our expectations and our core values are, and then make sure that we're clear about the bits that we include, and perhaps any bits that we don't then include, but make sure that they are explained and there's a good rationale for that. So what I hope all that will lead to, by, I would anticipate around kind of, you know, mid-October, is that we'll be in a position where we can undertake some further collaborative work to develop our policy, a strategy and a toolkit. So what we want to aim to do is to, obviously, a policy is really important, and that strategy document is critical, but also give our colleagues in school some practical resource, some toolkits that they can draw on in order to support them. And then we would share and refine that documentation via a further workshop or two, if necessary, to make sure that we've captured everything, and that we're providing sufficient guidance, tools, etc., to take the work forward, and hopefully address some of the challenges that are being experienced. So I hope that gives an overview of where we are so far, and where we plan to go next. And I'll stop sharing my screen and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. Can I see Councillor Mike White's hand up? Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Kate, can I apologise? Obviously, I wasn't able to get to the session in the Towers. But anyway, but as a governor, what I am picking up is regarding to parental and the child's involvement and with schools, is that if a child has got some sort of a disorder, health disorder, whether if the parent plus finds it difficult and the child, is that with them getting appointments or referrals. And I think this adds the frustration to the concern of the child missing school, you know. And also, what I picked up as well is obviously have we got to have the funding in place so we can for the specialist people that we need to help these children and obviously to actually support the parents. I gather that the head psychologist is moving on. Is that right? And we haven't got nobody in place.
So should I pick up? There's a couple of points.
Yes,
I got a
Kate.
couple I'd like to follow on, Chair, as well. But I just wanted to just clarify, because you know, without the sort of professionals in those areas, you know, we're obviously going to create further problems. You know, if we haven't got those specialist people in place. And also, what I would like to know as well, we've taken forward these proposals which we brought forward. Now we're looking in the key areas that we can support schools and, you know, and getting children, you know, to attend school, that and to obviously give the support of the child, the parents, and working closely with the school. Is how are we going to monitor what we want to roll out, and are we going to put key performance indicators in place so we can actually measure then how the different areas are actually rolling out? Are we on track, or is there an issue that we might need additional support or funding or actual resources? You know, that's what I'd like to know if possible, Kate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Kate, can you offer some answers to Councillor White, please?
Yeah, sure. So hopefully I've captured everything to answer. So the first point around appointments and referrals, was that in relation to medical? Were you thinking about the ND pathway, the autism?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, that, I mean, it's a health board waiting list, which is quite long. However, we do have very good and developing working relationships with the health board, particularly in relation to their ND neurodiverse pathways process. And we've been working quite closely with them and as part of the regional partnership board around some of the things that we can do. So I think what's really important is that support for children in schools shouldn't be led by a diagnosis. The support for children should be there when their needs are presenting. And we're working with our colleagues in health, but also with our specialist teacher teams to try and support schools with strategies and approaches that can help support children when they're presenting with features which may perhaps suggest that they would need to have eventually a diagnosis of autism. But really important is that we're looking at a needs-led approach. That's not to say the diagnosis isn't, or the assessment isn't important. Of course it is, but it shouldn't be a barrier to a child or a young person having access to the provision that they need. And to give an example of how, well, there's a couple of examples of the work that we're doing that will support that. So there's live on the council website at the moment a video, an animation that's recently been developed by our specialist teacher team in collaboration with the Regional Partnership Board, which talks exactly about what support is available for children, whether or not you've got a formal assessment of autism, but what the support is available for parents and for children. And that's live on the council website at the moment. I can share the link with the committee if it's helpful, because it will really articulate what the approach is. And you'll probably be aware that we're going out to consultation around our specialist teaching facilities, and one of the things that we're aiming to consult on is a change of designation for some of our SDFs to become social communication with learning difficulty SDFs. And what that does is remove the need for a formal assessment, so it means that children will be able to access those provisions if it's considered by our specialist teams and by the schools that their need is such. So it's going to be a much more needs-based rather than official document-based approach. So we're definitely moving towards that, so that those waiting lists should not be a barrier to any child accessing the support they need. In relation to funding for specialists more generically, and the point about education psychologists. So, I think it's fair to say that all public services are in challenging situations in terms of funding and resource, and we would all obviously like to have more, but we work within what we have available to us. And I think what part of our commitment as a central service is to be as efficient and as effective as we can with the resource that we have available. And so what we're shifting towards is an approach where we look at developing whole school approaches, so where our specialist teams support and facilitate where possible to help schools with strategies and approaches, rather than perhaps a more historical approach where we've been able to put a specialist member of staff into a classroom for a period of time to support an individual child or young person, which is an approach that can work, but what we want to do is we want to develop the expertise of school staff, and we want to use our specialists to do that. And so that's the approach we're working towards. There is a national challenge in terms of EP education psychologist training and recruitment. However, in Swansea, we are sufficiently staffed for educational psychologists. We have sometimes people move on, but we have been able to recruit new staff in, and so we haven't got any less than we've had previously. We have been struggling to find a principal educational psychologist because of the kind of national shortage, but we've got contingency arrangements in place for that, and we're working on our own kind of internal succession planning. So I think that we are doing as well as we can do in that arena. And then just in relation to how we would monitor the rollout of any policy around KPIs and so on, yeah, absolutely, that's really important. I think we've linked with our colleagues in school improvement to talk about how we can measure and what really matters in terms of really positive, inclusive approaches that support children and young people. We've got some really good examples in schools in Swansea, and it's about how we kind of identify that really good practice, how we identify measures that demonstrate that schools are really being successful, and how also where perhaps there's a bit of additional support needed, we know that we need to get in and help out. So yes, absolutely, we would be looking at that as part of the rollout. I hope that answered all the questions.
Is that okay, Mike?
Yes, thank you. And we are sharing the good practice then, Kate, are we, across the old school establishment?
Yeah, so we're starting to identify that's part of this work. So I think it's part of the work that's developing. What we need to kind of articulate is what we want really good practice to look like, what those expectations are. So when that feedback around consistency, it's about what would be the approach that we would want everyone to employ on a consistent basis, and then we know where we've got some really good practice, and we know who we need to talk to and ask to share. So but I think we can do better really at kind of formalizing that a little bit and putting some parameters around how we identify it, what the expectations are.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kate. Can I ask Councillor Robert Smith, Cabinet Member?
Yeah, please. Thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Mike White has hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the issues that are confronting schools, and Kate has given a very good resume of what we as a council are trying to do to address those needs. It's about capacity building, it's about mainstreaming, and it's about making sure that the provision is there, more or less irrespective of the process of diagnosis or whatever, important though that is. But we need to be able to respond and not wait for a diagnosis before we respond to needs. But I think we've got to recognise as well, and no doubt Mike, you would have picked this up, as most governors will have done in the last few years, needs are increasing. There's a report that's been highlighted in the press this morning has shown further evidence of that. It's not something that's confined to Swansea, it's not something confined to Wales. This is a UK-wide issue. And I think we need a proper, and I think I've said this many times before, there needs to be a proper UK-wide dialogue on how we respond to what is clearly, for whatever reason, a growing need in our society in terms of the additional needs being experienced by children and young people.
Thank you very much, Robert. Can I ask, if you don't mind, if Sandra would offer a comment? Myself and Councillor Joy went to the behaviour seminar in the Towers, and we found it very, very illuminating and beneficial. Sandra, do you mind?
Yeah, I would add to that, and to offer an opinion. It was excellent. There was a very wide range of educational professionals, as Kate has just said. They were able to have a very open dialogue, a very honest discussion, air their concerns, share their positives, and really be able to to talk to each other so that they are now in a position that they can work forward on common ground. And I think that was one of probably the most important things, is that they had time in what is normally a very, very busy environment. They had time to be able to sit and discuss as professionals where we are since all these events have happened, whether it's post-COVID, the increase, as we've said, in some of these issues and so on, but really to air the common ground as well as some of the differences, and be able to start to talk about a strategy heading forward, and that being spearheaded by the local authority, I think is very, very helpful. That the fact that there's going to be a second workshop to ensure everybody's voice is captured, questionnaires going out and so on. I think it is really important that there is a dialogue now that is really being able to be taken forward. Obviously, resources are always a concern, and that was mentioned on numerous occasions on that event. But that, as you said, is possibly a national issue that has got to be considered and taken forward. But the event itself, I think, really provided a foundation or a platform for those professionals to be able to take a real professional look at what is going on, and a direction forward.
That's excellent. Thank you. Very insightful, Sandra. Can I ask councillors to put their hands up whilst I offer a comment and ask a question or two? I thought it was excellent. I really did. I was very impressed by the way that all of the feedback was collected real time. So this wasn't with flip charts and pens and papers. We transformed ourselves into the 21st century and used Mentimeter to collect comments electronically. So as the discussion groups were going on, the comments would appear in on the board, the big screen, so we could all see everybody's input, which really added and gelled together all of the multi-agency perspectives. I think that was very powerful. It was very good and helpful for everyone in the room to see on one screen, not lots of little comments on post-it notes, but one great big screen with everything come together. It really told a story. Kate, would you say that this kind of work, I know the budgets are under pressure, but this kind of work, this kind of focus on prevention, early intervention, could save money and ease pressures? Is that a logical way forward, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, it's well documented, some of the costs of not addressing challenges in both additional learning needs and the kind of, you know, associated behaviours that emerge when children and young people aren't having their needs met in the way that is right for them. So I think if, you know, we can invest our time, resource and expertise in getting environments right and supporting children to make the very best of the opportunities that are available to them, then by default they should be able to succeed in whatever measure is appropriate for them to succeed. I think if we don't do that, we run the risk of increasing the need for children to have long-term specialist placements. We increase risks of children escalating into difficult situations in society. We know there's well-documented research and evidence around the criminal justice system in terms of unmet needs with children and young people. And, you know, I think that whatever we can do to prevent that and put our support and expertise in at the earliest stages has got to be beneficial. So I think, yeah, absolutely, we're also separately undertaking a piece of work around mapping out. It's hard to measure prevention in terms of, you know, cost avoidance, but we are undertaking a piece of work to kind of show to try and demonstrate what that early investment can really mean. But more importantly, I think, you know, it saves financially, but also it absolutely gives children better life chances. You know, we've all got different measures of what success is for a child. But we know that it isn't ending up in a criminal justice system. What it is about, you know, them achieving and becoming that citizens, and that early investment can really help there.
Thanks, Kate. Interestingly, in a previous Child and Family Scrutiny Committee meeting, I'm saying maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we had some cost prevention work done by the former head of Child and Family Social Services and the former head of, I think it was a Community Regeneration, Rachel, I think her name was. And what they did was they give an example of somebody who was facing great challenges. It was a single man that they looked at in a particular challenging circumstance, and they said, right, okay, the cost of starting the big public service engine, if you like, all the agencies, and cascaded that into the future over a period of time, versus the cost of horizontal integration, to tell the dad what was available around the corner, through the school, in the sports club, in the community centre, that sort of approach. That was one way that they focused on cost prevention possibilities. And it was, in one case, it was tens of thousands of pounds over a 12-month period. It was really quite interesting. So we perhaps could dig that out as an example. The other area that made me think was peer support. So we're talking about children, young people, we're talking about schools, and as Di says quite rightly, practitioners, not just looking at the qualified teachers in the school, but the wider school environment. We're looking at the community. It makes me think, in all of this multi-agency brilliance, about training the trainer, about the professionals bringing on the next generation and cluing people up. I'll give you one practical example about this. One of my many grandchildren, was born with a cleft palate. I know when I go home, there's probably going to be a few more there. But she was born with a cleft palate, and with very scarce resources, what they do is they encourage mums and dads and carers to cope with the issues and then to pass on to other people what they've learnt. And it's that very strong peer support mechanism which lies beyond the scope of the formal public services, but it really does engender the sense of we're all in it together. I was wondering whether that might be part of something in this behavioural context as we go forward.
Should I come back on that? Yeah.
Yes, please, Kate.
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. We had our colleagues from Swansea Parent Care Forum at the workshop, really helpful. There's also a parent advocacy network group that my colleagues been attending for exactly those purposes, really. It's kind of, you know, developing the support and the strength that comes from peers, giving you kind of some input, advice, guidance, pointing you in the right direction, and even just sharing experiences. So I think, you know, it's absolutely what I would say is that we can't achieve any of this in isolation, and drawing upon as many elements as possible is going to be really critical, but making sure that we do that in a kind of, I think that the bit about the consistent values and expectations is really important. So if we can get to a point where we can articulate what we all expect of each other, and then we draw in all of the relevant agencies to offer that support, including peers, absolutely, I would agree with that.
Interesting. Any other questions before we move on, councillors? In the room, Councillor Lyndon Jones. Thank you, Lyndon.
Yeah, Greg. Thanks, Kate, for the report. I think it was really pragmatic and also 2 words he used there in the report, that it was aspirational but equally achievable, because it's no good having something you aspire to and there's no way ever of achieving it. And I think those were really, really important. You mentioned that following the workshop, you sent a survey out to schools, but it was getting to the end of term. Was there a great response back from those schools that didn't attend? Obviously, that would need to be chased up if not. And then you getting that second workshop to sort of cover all those schools so that people, they're all included in it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. No, we haven't had a huge response from the questionnaire at the moment, and I think that is the timing at the end of term. Everyone's just was so busy doing everything, so we're extending the date for that. That'll run until the end. The second workshop is scheduled, I think, for the 17th of September. So we'll keep the questionnaire open till then, and we'll be resending it and prompting people and reminding them that that's their opportunity to contribute, because the more contributions we have, the better. So yeah, quite mindful of the timing. It's never a good time to do challenging work, but we'll give people every opportunity that we can to contribute and make sure that we don't just kind of close the door once a deadline's passed.
Okay, Lyndon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Good. Excellent. Okay, I can't see any hands up. I'm squinting to check. I can't see anything on the screen there, just to make sure. Kate, excellent as ever. You've done a great job of reflecting what was a brilliant event, very well organised. I've got to say, your MC skills could be put to good use in a different environment, I think, if you want to move forward into a new career. But it was very well organised, very tightly managed, and I think there was a buzz in the room. There were clear challenges, there were clear frustrations, there were clear issues and concerns and all the rest of it, but there wasn't negativity. People were coming together in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration and plotting a realistic way forward. I'm not going to keep repeating aspirational and unachievable, but I think that could end up in the report come next April. I don't know, but the key thing has got to be, this is not theoretical, it's not abstract, this is practical, real world. If we've got any chance of putting a Swansea stamp on this approach, well, then that's what we've got to keep our eye on consistently throughout. Thank you very much indeed, Kate. That was excellent. So
Thank
can
you.
we move forward then onto agenda item number 5, where we will have a look at learner progress, and I'm sure this is going to be Di Thomas. Di?
Yeah, it is indeed. Good afternoon, pawb. Prynawn da. And unfortunately, you're right. The weather hasn't broken to sunshine. It's broken to rain and showers. But hey, look, it's the holidays. So thanks, everybody. The purpose of my verbal update today is to give food for thought to councillors and to members on this progression piece. And I haven't got a presentation to share like Kate has. It's just to provide just that space for councillors to consider and members to consider this piece of work. So first and foremost, what we're trying to design is a Swansea set of principles that help us to understand practically how we would interpret pupil progression across our schools and settings in the local authority. So in order for me to do that, I think it was quite useful for me to reflect on Welsh Government's guidance. And I think one of the pitfalls to Welsh Government's guidance through its hub platform is it can become quite cyclical, and you find yourself going into the same place that you were when you started. And I think missing some of the really important mandatory elements of the curriculum and assessment guidance. And if I'm honest with you, school colleagues, practitioners have missed some of the guidance because of that, the nature of its work. So the school improvement team, as part of one of the actions, is designed to filter some of the information, and our team haven't necessarily been able to do that as avidly as we would wish, but owing to the difference in the way that the local authority is now funded through its school improvement work, we are enabling ourselves to do that. I'll talk about that in the end. So overall, progression in learning is a process of developing knowledge, skills, and understanding over time. And I think that might be a good nugget for us to keep in the forefront of our minds. What are the requirements for each school and setting? Well, each school and setting has to publish through its governing body its arrangements for curriculum and assessment. And there is some specifics about the content of that publication, and the school improvement team have supported schools to do that. In addition to that, there are the mandatory principles of progression, which provide a framework under which schools should consider their arrangements for progress. They are very high level and do not describe the practical arrangements that each school and or setting should follow. Ongoing assessment should be in place for every learner. Assessment is about pupil progress, and I think we talked about that during our last meeting, where assessment is one thing and assessments are the other. And assessment is the suite that looks at assessment in the formative and summative viewpoints. Assessment should enable us to understand the learning and the teaching required to support pupil progress. I'm mentioning a couple of things now, Chair, that hopefully will ring true with members so that we can find a way forwards. And again, it should be suitable for all learners. And pivotally for me, assessment or the process will determine the next step in pupil progression and the teaching required. I don't think we should lose sight of that. I've got some further detail around that, but I just want to go quickly now to what's happened thus far. So 2 years ago, the local authority embarked on a programme to facilitate through a renowned educational professional the development of a shared understanding of linear progression from 3 to 16. What that did was get colleagues around the table. It was just after the pandemic, so it was a challenging time where they would look at what progress looks like in disciplines and or subjects under a theme that is derived from the mandatory elements from the statements of what matter. That was highly effective, and it enabled colleagues to build maps, curriculum maps that supported a better view of the skills and the knowledge and the understanding required in a particular context. So it's basically a cluster or feeder model. Those maps are being used now. What it did not do, though, is it did not support an individual view of a school's curriculum design and or the principles of progression or pedagogy that sit underneath that. So it was about the skills, the knowledge and experience, and in some cases, the terminology, the vocabulary that would be expected within that. That's what took place. Following that, we, as a school improvement team, have developed 3 episodes of self-evaluation, so leadership effectively. The first one is an overview. That was an outcome of the school improvement guidance. The second was a very specific view of how to quality assure the work of our own schools and settings. And the third, the current episode 3, is a deep dive into what it looks like, some practical guides of an Abertawe, Ysgol Abertawe, so a false school, to really work on some documentation to support a better view of the school improvement journey and self-evaluation. Episode 4, to support this work, looks like an even deeper dive view into supporting a better view of overall individual pupil progress. More on that to come. So that's where we're at. I mentioned about the school improvement team's use of local authority education grant, a new grant to local authorities since April 24. And we've done this with the following. We've employed a lead officer for curriculum learning and teaching who started on the 1st of July. The school improvement partnership have been given the job of being the recipient of bids or business models, planning models from schools and or cluster partnerships to develop some work together. So a piece of work could be a deeper look into the principles of progression that supports a shared understanding of progression in a cluster model. And collaborative partnerships are a really key piece of that work. So that's what's looking forward to us. In terms of a little bit deeper in terms of the purpose of assessment, this might be somewhere that we feel that we should provide some really clear guidance around, and my perspective is we should. The purpose of assessment, as I mentioned previously, is to support an understanding of learners' progress and to support their day-to-day learning. A second purpose is for us to be able to capture that progress over time. And a third function of assessment is for us to use our knowledge of those groups of learners, whether it's a year group, whether it's a group of like-minded individuals, whether it's a group of vulnerable learners. We use the information that we've got on the progress they make in order to inform our practice. So we use it as an evaluation tool, a self-evaluation tool. While we identify and support learners on an ongoing basis, these are the things that we should be doing, that it should enable us to do. It should enable us to identify the strengths and areas for development for each individual learner. It should identify their achievements, and it should identify the barriers that exist. Those next steps should include a level of challenge and or support required by the school and by the learner. It should be embedded in day-to-day practice, and it should be we shouldn't be able to separate, I'm not going to say the word, we shouldn't be able to separate the assessment processes from the learning process. Okay, it should be seamless. That's an individual basis, and Welsh Government and we agree that there should be a shared understanding of progression, and a shared understanding of progression outline joint expectations for how learners should progress. So whilst what I described previously might be a classroom focused or a small group focus, the shared understanding of progression scales that up either towards an organisation viewpoint through a school or wider towards a cluster model or a partnership. It should also allow us to develop some coherence, so we understand that learner's journey over time on a bigger picture. And we should also use a shared understanding of progression to understand the expectations when compared to those in other schools, so that we're not looking in isolation at one individual school or setting, that we're comparing the pupil progress to other schools and settings outside of our local community. So there's a number of items in there, Chair, which is a summary of where I perceive we should bolster our view and provide principles and some practical guidance for schools and settings in order in this piece of work. And I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, Di. Very helpful. I'll kick off while people put their hands up and indicate that they want to speak. I was blown away in Gendros School's governing body meeting last week. We had a presentation from 5 fantastic 6, 7-year-old children, and they took us through assessment for learning practice in the school. Right? Completely child-led. It was fantastic. It was practical, it was real world, it was going not in that old-fashioned, 4 out of 10, see me exclamation mark in red pen that I had quite often when I was in Gendros School. This was really about stepping at the pace of the children and young people. This is absolutely in the growth mindset mould, and it was so heartening to see. It was buoyant, it was fantastic, and we asked the children some questions afterwards. All of them answered with enthusiasm, and I asked, well, look, is learning fun? All of them were sort of bouncing on their seats and jumping up and down, so I don't know if it's relevant, for us to see practical examples of this sort of approach in action. I'm not saying that we need to fill the Lillian Hopkin room full of primary school children, even though that'd be great fun. But, is this something that we could possibly look at as the year goes ahead? I'm not saying Gendros, I'm saying any school, obviously, not just I should declare an interest. I'm a governor at that school, of course. But seeing it in action is much, much more exciting, bright and live than reading some boring Welsh Government document put together by a distant civil servant. Nothing wrong with them. I used to be one myself, right? But that's it. This is practical, what works. The teachers who helped the kids with the presentation were full of enthusiasm themselves, and the way that the kids engaged practically with the learning challenges, the way that they owned their own learning journeys, the way that they went through a process of cold writing without help and hot writing with support, breaking down stories, beginning, middle and end, adjectives and all this sort of, it was fabulous. So that learner progress, that would be great to see, with an emphasis on, does it work for everyone? And what about those who stall? What about those who are whose progress is harder to see, who are at risk of falling through the gaps in the pavement, if you like? And then we're back to the behaviour. As we said before, I think Cabinet Member Rob Smith said, we're in this progress. These are joined up, and attendance runs as a stream throughout. So how can we focus on seeing that learning journey as we go forward? I'll finish off by saying something else about that afterwards, but I can see at the moment we've got Councillor Mike White's hand up. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, in regards to obviously the progression methods, how will the school sort of roll out? Because, for example, children need an extra support, and more support compared with our more enabled, talented pupils. How will the criteria work in those areas, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The idea behind this piece is that this is learner focused, so it's not about, there's no standard set, there's no criteria to meet. This is about identifying the individual next steps for each learner, no matter what their starting point. So the whole idea is about we understand where these pupils are and what they need to do in order to make progress. And if that's a very small step, because of the developmental needs of that individual learner, then so be it. So we put those next steps in place, and then we recognise and acknowledge through celebration when they meet those milestones. And if it were for you've mentioned more able learners, if we've got learners, it might well be the same learner in a different discipline, they make big steps, then again we set appropriate targets, celebrate those, acknowledge those achievements, and provide next steps. So it's learner focused and individual in a similar way that our chair has described some of the activities around hot rights and cold rights is individual to each learner. Hope that provides a response.
Great.
Is that okay, Mike?
Yeah. So all the schools will know exactly what that profile is going to have to look like, Dave.
Yeah, that's why it's so difficult for the local authority to give a something to every school and setting in their local authority, because there's no if we take next year, for example, Key Stage 4 at GCSE will be the only time where there's a standard measure across a 3 to 16 continuum. So, for a 4-year-old, we can't apply a standard national assessment set of criteria. So it's about achievement, not attainment.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Before I call in members in the room, can I just, while I remember, I could just think, one of the things that I saw in Gendros School recently, Mike, was the encouragement of children to be resourceful, to be tenacious, to stick with it. And what we saw was acronyms and abbreviations being used. One was what a good one looks like. an example. So they got that written up on the board, what a good one looks like. So you'd ask me to write a story. What the heck is a story? How do I do it? That's what a good one looks like. Arithmetic, counting, sums, what does a good one look like? There it is. Aha! Thank you very much. I love that. Using lanyards, red, amber, green. Do you get it? How do you feel? Green, less rock, miss, we're away. Red, I'm not quite there yet, actually. And the kids loved the lanyards and the opportunity in the room to say, look, this is where I am. And then the third one was C3 before me. Access resources available to you in your peer group. Ask others, learn from each other. Access resources in the class because you know where to find your own answers before you ask the teaching team and the practitioners. I thought it was really very exciting to see the practical realities. So I hope that little example, those little examples help. Mike. Councillor Robert Smith, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And again, can I thank Di on this occasion for the work that him and his team are leading on this, because I think the acting as that conduit between Welsh Government policy and the reality on the ground is something that's desperately needed. That is the function of a local education authority. That's the function that's being performed here, and I think it is paying dividends. And I think whether it's formative assessment or summative assessment, and both of them have their role. I think the key things here is that it doesn't become a burden to schools, that it's manageable and that it's purposeful, that this assessment is giving the school and giving the practitioners in each school something of value that either acts to identify the next steps, identifies what each child needs to progress, and then as well as that, providing some form of accountability. Although that the two things need to remain separate. I think if we get this right, and I've got no doubt from listening to Di that we're on the right lines at least, I think we're going to make a huge step forward in implementing the new curriculum, and above all in making the most of the new curriculum, because I don't think it's curriculum versus assessment. The two things need to go hand in hand and complement each other, and I think that the approach that Di has outlined, and I certainly endorse that as a way forward.
Thank you very much, Robert. I can't see any hands indicating. Councillor Lyndon Jones, please.
Just very briefly, thanks, David. Yeah, that was excellent. When you mentioned strengths and so on, where you're looking at the assessments, by that very nature, there will be weaknesses. Are we sort of learning from those? And is there a read across between different schools and so on?
When I mentioned strengths, I was talking about individual pupil strengths, so that we can build upon those. I suppose perhaps you're talking about, I assume you're talking about unsuccessful strategies that we've perhaps seen in schools and settings, Lyndon, is that correct?
Go on, Lyndon.
No, I'm not. You mentioned even individual strengths and so on. What about, obviously, if people are strong in some areas, they're going to be weak in others. Is there a read across? Are there certain areas that people are weak in, and therefore are we measuring that, and so that we can make them all strong? No, it wasn't about things that have failed. It's all far from it. Yeah,
I've got you. Thanks for the clarity. Yeah, certainly. We've got intelligence around either perceived and or statistical information. We've still got access to such assessment forms. An example of that could be reading scores, for example, are not as high as we would like them to be. We can blame a global pandemic. We can blame a cultural shift society. The reality is pupils don't read as well as they used to. So there's one example. Another one is how pupils apply numeracy and mathematics across the curriculum. The perception is that's a deficient model at the moment. So we can use that information. And certainly, yes, we're able to do that. But it's very difficult to do it in an organisation such as the local authority. What would be much more useful is if we could facilitate collaborative partnerships in a locality, in a cluster, for example, who feed one particular school, to look at those common areas of deficiencies, for example. And that could be because experiences aren't, the children don't have access to the experiences or as many that they might if they were lived in another part of the city. So certainly I see there's a real opportunity for us to further develop that work, Lyndon, and find out more on a local basis what we're able to provide support for.
And I think, again, Di has hit the nail on the head, because, one of the key issues that I've looked at over the years is the importance of value added and being able to measure what children in one school are doing compared to their peers. And by that, I mean their peers. A school might look as if it's achieving what it should be doing, but when you compare what the similar cohort of children in another school are achieving, perhaps they could be doing something different. And I think it's being sensitive to that and working with schools so that they've got the confidence to learn from each other as we're trying to achieve. And we've been doing that for a long time with school to school working in Swansea. I think is one of our strengths, and it needs to be something we build on. And I think this gives us an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, in the context of collaborative working, yes, thank you very much. Very, very powerful factors, aren't they? Councillor Mike White.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for letting me come back in. Yeah, to follow on and endorse what the Cabinet member has said. Yeah, I think, cluster working would be very advantageous because of the links with the comprehensive. We would encourage all our children in a cluster to go there and use their local comprehensive. And I think that the staff in the comprehensive would be grateful of those working links, especially when it's going through a transitional period. So if they got sort of 7 schools within a cluster, they can do a fair assessment then of what are going to be the challenges when they go over to the comprehensive school. And I think if that could be rolled out, and if it's going to be successful, then that could be shared right across the city and county of Swansea. But I would certainly endorse that.
Thank you very much, Mike. I can't see anyone else indicating. We are looking content. So we move on from this point, but I want to offer one last comment and a point of reflection. So Di is poking us with a pointy stick there for us to go away and reflect and to think ahead, and to respond. And I did this after the last meeting, and I sent a little document to some officers about my thoughts. And progression to what? What does success look like? What's the point of the school? What is the point? What is the longer term game that we want? In the 1950s, I mentioned that we did have some special laws made in Swansea's places of public entertainment because young people were fighting in gangs and actually stabbing themselves. Teddy boy culture, rock around the clock, right? Now, those people are in their mid-70s now. Okay, they're not all in prison. They are solicitors. They are lead officers in councils, in the police, in the magistrate system. Okay, they are, and people move forward. So it's very important for us not to be hypocritical, not to look at the current generation and fall into the trap. None of us would ever do this. Oh, kids today. Look back. What I'd ask people to do is to remember our own childhoods, remember where we were. I'm 58 now, but it's like a journey which goes from 6 to 60, really, isn't it? In learning, cradle to the grave learning. In the 70s and 80s, when I was young, we had punks, mods, rockers, new romantic skinheads, football hooliganism was rife. And I know that some of those people were involved with very negative behaviour patterns and extremely well in life. I nearly mentioned, I'm not going to mention to somebody who was very recently, who was condemned out of hand when he was a young person for his evilness and all the rest of it, who did incredibly well as he got older in education and in business. Okay, so let's map our journey. Let's just bear that in mind as we go forward. And that my final comment then leads me in that context to think about how we can build on the excellent work that we've got in the context of business, learning from successful people, as we've said in previous versions of this committee, in education, in business and in sport, looking at vocational opportunities and developing and expanding those to take a horses for courses approach as we go forward. I know this is going to be bound up in everything that we are considering one way or another, but I wanted to make that point clear because nobody in this committee, but some of my friends have talked quite negatively recently about young people today. And I thought, my goodness, if they visited their local primary or comp, they would be blown away by how fantastic children and young people are today, you know. So it's important for us to bear that in mind. So thank you very much, Di. Another really insightful report. We move forward now on to the work plan, item 6 of the agenda, which is attached to the back. And we can see that we've got our next meeting on the 18th of September, and we're going to alternate as we did previously. So for each of the meetings then, we will have in advance a more detailed structure. Kate, Di, some more detail in the structure as we go through the learning programme, so we'll see what we're focusing on as we go ahead. My comments previously were about sort of looking for people, multi-agency, as we would see in Kate's context in particular. Would it help if, and I have asked a number of colleagues if they would come to the committee to help us to shine a light into particular areas. One of my colleagues is the research director for the University of Wales Trinity St David's Centre for Teacher Education and Research. So she said she'd be willing, if we wanted her to come along or one of her colleagues to come along, to shine a light into maybe learner progress, maybe, marrying up what best practice says and what works with Welsh Government guidance and great practice on the ground, if this would add value. Another one of my colleagues, Superintendent Mark Kavanagh, is the head of communities for South Wales Police. He takes the lead with substance misuse from a policing perspective. And I think we're actually seeing wisdom and real-world intelligence being used in the policing context. Would that help? Another one of my colleagues, former Chief Constable Julian Williams, who is the co-chair of the Western Bay Drugs Commission. Julian said he would be happy to come in and give the committee a flavour of the realities of substance misuse and the impact on children and young people if mum, dad, family member have particularly challenging issues. Young carers, for example. So if that would help committee members, then we can call on others to come in and add a bit of value. So can I ask, do you think that this would add value? I'm looking in the room, but online, I can see hands going up online. Bev, I can see Bev, I can't see Mike. Yeah, hand up there. So what I'm thinking is just short, as we've done previously, thank you, Mike, short, focused, just to shine a light, and I'd be led by Di and by Kate to say, look, how could, we maximise the value from the input of skilled professionals here? What would add value? Okay, so I'll email Kate and Di afterwards and say, look, what do you think? And then I'll see if we can organise some short, focused insights as we go forward, which will tap into the learning agenda as we go forward. Di, your hands up.
Yes, thanks. Two things from me. Just to remind me if who's on next, if it's me or Kate, I think it might be me. And just to answer your previous question,
yeah, you in September. Sorry.
Great. And if I can, no need for people to respond. But you asked a question about what's our aim. Our aim in Wales is to create pupils that embody the 4 purposes, so that the stuff is already there. And I know that's not necessarily practical enough. The reason I bring it up is because we're not seeking to do that at 3, at 4, at 5, at 6, at 7. We're seeking to do that by the end of their educational journey, their statutory education, by the time they're 16. So I think we just need to remember that it is a journey as you've described, and there is our goal. That's our marker in the distance. And just useful for us to reflect on that potentially, and not necessarily use that as a benchmark at every stage. I hope that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Di. And I would just add there that if we translate what that means into Swansea, it means we want to produce tidy people. That's what we want at the end of the day. We want people who live quite happy, healthy, fruitful lives and are not spending their time with the negatives around their necks as anchors into their adult lives, which can be awful and destroying. Okay, so I think we're up at the end of the agenda there. I can't see any hands. Anyone in the room want to add anything else? Cassandra Joy?
Yeah, sorry. One of the things that I wondered whether we could include, and it is part of Learner Progress, is something to do with multi-agency working. Some of these children who are struggling, particularly the vulnerable learners, either are getting or need intervention from not just educationalists, but more than that. And I just wondered whether it's worth at some point a little look at how the agencies, so if you've got particularly, a challenging family, how the social services, educationers, all of the others interact to help those children, to bring those children along. Because I do think there are times it's far more than just education's issue.
Councillor Joy, can I thank you for that? It was something I wrote down. I said, I'm not going to talk about child and family social services and multi-agency working again, because I know Kate and I are all over this. But in the behaviour event, I had a good chat with our head of service, Julie Davis, and with Principal Officer Gavin Evans. And, first class excellence. And I know some of the areas that they are pushing forward with you. So maybe that's the next thing that we could put on our agenda for discussion with Kate and I, to see if we can invite somebody in to give us some, again, practical realities. I'm still upset. I worked with Child and Family Social Services 30 years ago. I can't believe it's gone so quick. But I was blown away when I first went into houses where there was chaotic lifestyles, right? It really upset me. If I went back into that environment today, I'd be equally as upset as I was then. So it's understanding the normalities of different childhoods is a critical factor, and we've seen, I'm looking at the chair of our scrutiny committee in Councillor Jones, and we've seen in scrutiny lots of examples of brilliance, not excellence, in schools that are really switched on to the realities of the children, and that maybe that comes to building excellence, as we've said before in previous committees. So can I ask Councillor Joy, do you want to come in? Are you going to? Oh no, I thought you had your hand on the button ready to go then. Di?
Yeah, I welcome Councillor Joy's comments, and through this piece of work, the progression side of things, happy to be corrected, but I see those services as a tool by which to remove barriers to learning. So I don't think we need to use, I'm sure you don't mean this, Councillor Joy, that we need to understand the progress of those learners in a particular piece of work, whether it's an engagement with an. But I think how much success did we have to remove those barriers via these services, and then therefore do those children make progress? And I think that's really key, because we forget that sometimes.
Guys, and that's what I meant is, in every school, this stuff is going on in every environment. And I just think maybe it needs to be brought in a sense, in a positive way, as to how this is being almost absorbed into the learner progress, for those children to achieve. This is what's going on behind the scenes for some of these children. And there's more interventions in some families and some environments than there are in others in terms of what is needed.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Once again, a full, fruitful, really challenging committee meeting, which really does bode well for the future. I think we're moving forward in a very positive direction. So nobody else is indicating. So on that note, I will inform you all that the next meeting is on Wednesday, the 18th of September at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So please pray. I'm not religious, but please pray for no technical glitches with our international computer system, because I'm going on holiday on Monday. I'd be devastated if something happens. And on that point, can I wish you all a happy and healthy summer? When the sun comes out for a couple of hours, buy the barbecue, get sunburned and enjoy yourselves. Okay, everyone, on that note, I will close the meeting. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
What is the